Manifesto for Change: Pros and Cons for a Better Society. This political manifesto is an alternative idea to all the policies that the current established parties have, or uni-party, whatever you want to call them in the UK. The Labour Party once used to represent workers, but not anymore. It represents the interests of international central bankers and not people. These ideas are divided into positive contributions, which means more government income, negative contributions, which means the government or the taxpayer pays more, and additional benefits, which may have a neutral contribution. These ideas are designed to make a fairer society for the overwhelming majority, a true test for democracy. But the total overall benefit for the economy needs to be fully costed before implementation. First positive contribution, Brexit. We did have a vote on this, and the outcome rules were not firmly established. In the end, it was 51-49%. We should have had maybe something more statistically significant, but nevertheless, this needs to happen. It's obviously been a failure because things have become much worse with the UK economy since the hurried Brexit. However, this does open up opportunities for a Commonwealth economic area, which is not being pushed by Labour or by the other uni-party members. However, if we look at the India trade deal, which will give us 0.1% increase by 2040, it's absolutely ridiculous the amount of rubbish that's coming out from these so-called trade deals. And also the one currently signed with the US isn't worth the paper it's written on. We can still remain on friendly terms with the EU. And as I mentioned, the implementation has failed. But the Brexit situation was never about immigration. 2/3 of immigration was from the EU. So this is before Brexit. So the legal immigration that we have now is just a very, very small part of this. And we can never return to a no Brexit scenario, which is what Labour seems to want to do now. NATO exit. NATO was formed as a bulwark against the Warsaw Pact, but now it's just used as a military arm of the Washington-Westminster regime in the US imperial wars of aggression. America's suggesting 2-3%, maybe even more of GDP for defense. And I would just ask people who are reading this or who have critical thinking abilities, which country attacked the UK since 1945? Not one country did. And yet the mainstream media is just pushing for more and more and more spending on war, and pensioners freeze. Children, they don't have proper schools. They have one meal per day. There are 9 million people economically inactive in the UK. And yet £50 billion at least annually is spent on the war machine. We need to prioritise what's more important to the UK. Is it war, or is it the mental and physical health, the jobs of our workers? National social care. We have an insurance system called national insurance, but we need to have one separate one for social care. So for young people, this would include a small component starting maybe from when you start working, and it will ramp up with age. So this means that not only will you pay for your NHS as well as your current medical needs, but also your social care. National insurance needs to be recalculated. At the moment, there is a cap of 2%. So somebody who's earning a lot of money, which in the UK is definitely something above £500,000 per year, is only paying a very, very small amount relatively for national insurance. A trend in this presentation is increasing the tax burden for the rich people, who in relative terms are undertaxed compared to many other countries in the world. They have it easy in the UK. Reduce NHS bureaucracy. Save the NHS, which is now bloated by administrators and fund managers who think they can run the NHS, which is worth nearly £200 billion a year as a city bank. We need less privatisation, less corruption, and more medical staff to become administrators. So this includes doctors and nurses, consultants, surgeons, who maybe do not want to work specifically in their medical professions, but want to use their knowledge as medical experts to improve and administer the NHS. NHS subsistence costs. When you go into hospital in the UK, you don't need to pay anything for your food and drinks. Whereas in countries like Germany, you need to pay €10 per day for a maximum amount per year. And this means tested suggestion here, subsistence costs, could be introduced. For example, £5 per day to cover meals and drinks or catering, and maximum 20 days in a year. And this would not be a big burden for people who are working with a reasonable salary. Voluntary solidarity tax. This is an opportunity for richer citizens to contribute specific causes by voluntary tax. This could include areas like transport, healthcare, housing, education. This is voluntary, and there should also be some tax deductible possibilities, which you can declare on your tax return. The maximum tax rate. This should be increased to 50% for a fairer society. So this will target the top 0.1 to 1% of earners. And what does rich mean? It's all relative to a society. But in the UK, £500,000 a year is about 20 times more than the average salary. This should be considered the baseline for rich. We need to tax the rich more. And they are still earning or have a better tax situation than many EU countries. Houses of Parliament. MPs can have only one job and are required to work full-time for a full-time salary. No debate about that. They cannot have second, third, fourth, fifth, 10th jobs, earn lots of money and never attend Parliament. Plus they get paid extra to attend sessions in Parliament. We need to abolish this. We need to ban terrorist lobbying organisations like LFI and CFI and avoid the massive conflict of interest. These people, they put their own contacts in to administer and police these conflict of interest situations, and nothing seems to happen. We need to abolish all these establishment perks that they have. This is costing taxpayers a massive amount of money. House of Lords, abolish completely as an unnecessary expense. These fuckers contribute nothing. They're bloated, they're well connected, They work on behalf of lobbying groups. They contribute absolutely nothing to our democracy, our society. The only thing they do is leech off taxpayers and workers. Close international central banks. The Bank of England is an international central bank. It's not owned by the UK. The square mile in the centre of London is actually not governed by the UK, by the UK laws, by the royal family, by Parliament. It's not governed by the British people. They're a law unto themselves. And what's been happening is that they are just printing money and lending it to the government, with the result that now each UK person has a debt of £40,600 before they are born. We need to refund our national debt of £2.6 trillion, and it's increasing massively, especially with the 9 million people economically inactive. That is about 1/7 of the population of the UK economically inactive. It's ridiculous. Work does not pay in the UK. This debt is around the necks of our citizens who never wanted war or COVID lockdowns or any other malarkey going on, which does not work to the benefit of British workers. We need to either seize that national debt, kick out the international central bankers, or issue national bonds to citizens to show solidarity and feel more part of our society. If they become stakeholders, economic stakeholders in the future of the UK, then this is more beneficial. Negative contributions. So these contributions mean the government or the taxpayers need to contribute more relatively. So VAT reduction. VAT is to tax on a tax. It's double taxation. Let's call it that. We should ramp it down to 10% at around 1% per annum. So maybe even less, maybe 5%. And the extra money that people have from the kickback from the reduced sales tax is we have more spending power. And it's rubbish to say that this will increase inflation. That's just economic bullshit. Because the reason for this is to do with the international central bankers, with all their schemes behind their currency trading, betting on currencies. This has been causing inflation, because if you look at the salaries in the UK, they've barely moved since 2008, yet inflation has been high. So you cannot say inflation is directly linked to the spending power of citizens. That's not true. Income tax threshold. Income tax is payable only on earnings higher than the average salary, which is currently £26,000 per annum. NI should still be payable, and social care. And this threshold should increase only with wage inflation, not RPI, retail price index inflation. Transportation subsidy. The combustion engine is becoming more and more efficient. We as a country should think strategically and give subsidies to car companies who produce more and more efficient combustion engines. And we're talking about a horizon of 10 years or more. And we need to remove taxpayer subsidy to electric vehicles, which artificially increases the market. I don't want my tax income to go to somebody to buy an EV and feel smug. It's about 1/3 of the price that they get from taxpayers. The 2030 bans on combustion engines are not feasible, since it takes more than 10 years to develop infrastructure and technology. And anyway, self-charging hybrids like the Toyota Prius are much better for the economy and also for customer um, customer performance, customer benefits, because they do not need a grid infrastructure. Give people a choice. Business development subsidy. A subsidy for maximum 5 tax-free areas to promote technical companies or tech companies, maximum 5 years, but they must stay a minimum 10 years and employ a minimum number of people. This will attract and encourage innovation. UK is an innovative country with leading universities and R&D institutions. This will help to laser focus any innovation in the UK and also prepare our technology, our infrastructure, our businesses more on a longer term strategic level. Subsidized housing. Governments since World War II have been talking about affordable housing. Well, perhaps they build affordable houses, but then after a few years, they go, let's say, onto the market, the housing market, and there's a massive amount of inflation. Here, we need some kind of social contract to say, we're going to build subsidized houses, but at the moment, the price of the houses to the buyer will be 4 times the average salary. So you must be earning the average salary or less to afford this house. And at the moment, this is £104,000. However, you can sell the house, but you cannot speculate on it. So when you sell the house, for example, in 10 years' time, then the inflation of the house will be linked to wage inflation only. So it doesn't mean to say you can have 10 or 20% per annum, but it's got to be wage inflation. So that means it still remains affordable. And obviously it's one house per family. Fuel tax. We need a stage reduction in fuel tax to 20% or even less. Combustion engines are becoming smarter, using much more technology, software, for example. They're using cloud computing. They are using machine learning, artificial intelligence, and they are becoming more efficient. However, it must be remembered that electric vehicles still produce pollution. Not only do they produce brake dust or particulate matter from increased braking from tires, but also the electricity which is generated for the charging stations, the DC or AC charging, they also create pollutants like CO and NOx and other pollutants. So this needs to be acknowledged. Mass transportation. Return rail and bus companies to public ownership. Governments, i.e. taxpayers, subsidize these companies anyway for decades. The main purpose should be to provide a cheap, nationwide alternative to using cars, not creating stakeholder value. Utilities, the same thing. They need to be returned to public ownership. The money that's been paid out, for example, Thames Water, I don't want to pick on them, but they are a big topical example at the moment. They paid tens of billions out in dividends, but they haven't been updating infrastructure. And now they bullied the government into saying that water prices should increase by at least 30%. So I'm asking, how is this a free market? How is this democracy? Privatization under Margaret Thatcher was supposed to improve the situation for consumers, not put them into debt. And again, the main purpose should be to provide cheap, nationwide energy, not shareholder value. Minimum wage, 12 to 15 pounds per hour, equivalent to the average wage for a 40-hour week. Index linked to progress with inflation. Any company which relies on worker exploitation to function should not be in business. Reduce the council tax burden. If you look at some famous examples in the UK, like Birmingham, they spent £2 billion on settling court claims due to some kind of abuse of workers, allegedly, or discrimination. £2 billion. So people living in Birmingham have said, well, I've been paying 20, 30 years for council tax and it's just gone out in court fees, which is absolutely ridiculous. We need to have more oversight on what councils are spending on, because they've just been completely frivolous, wasteful, and we cannot afford it. However, the council tax should be recalculated. Richer people should pay more, but it's still lower than many EU countries, and it should be taken automatically from salaries. No income tax for low earners. Nobody should pay income tax if they're earning below £26,000 per annum. This will stimulate the workforce, because from a previous contribution, if there are two people earning the average wage, they can still afford to buy property, subsidized property. So this should create an extra stimulus to workers. No income tax for pensioners. The pensionable age will increase to 70 plus. Let pensioners enjoy the fruits of their labour and contributions. However, they should be able to retire at 50 with corresponding reduced benefits. So here, neutral contributions, which do not mean money flowing in or money flowing out to the current government. Saving interest rates. Banks must pay tax-free interest rates at the current rate of inflation on savings accounts. This avoids banks making unfair profits, and it will mean savings are not devalued. Bank operating conditions. The UK establishment will not like this. Fractional reserve banking means that banks have less than 10% of money that they could give to customers if necessary. So by far, the vast majority, 90% plus, they invest, and they don't have this money on their books. So banks should honour 100% of savings, and that means there's no need for stress tests, and bank runs will never occur. And this requires a global effort. It requires international cooperation. Modern national or citizen service. This is a kind of national service, which means young people aged 18 to 25 must work 1 year in non-military areas where there are not enough resources. For example, building roads, social care, teaching. They can learn new skills, or if they already have some skills, they can pass them on to other people. It offers young people a chance to contribute to society. Overall, these items or suggestions should be built into a manifesto and create a better society for citizens. The positives will overcome the negatives and contribute to a fairer society. Detailed costing and impact are needed. The changes should be ramped in over a maximum of 10 years. UK plc will not be run for international central bankers, but for the people, for the hard workers, who are the ones who really contribute to society.